Welcome to July's ECR Wednesday webinar hosted by eLife, the series that aims to give early career researchers a platform to discuss issues important to you and your research career. Today, our speakers will discuss the benefits and strategies for involving patients and the public in the research process. The webinar will begin with the panelists sharing their stories. Then, in the second half of the webinar, we will be putting your questions to them. To ask a question, you can type it in the question box on the GoToWebinar Functions panel, or you can tweet us. We are at eLife Community on Twitter using the ECR Wednesday hashtag. Finally, I'd just like to let you know that we are recording the webinar and we'll make it available on YouTube in the near future. Now I'll pass over to Vinod to introduce the panelists.
Thank you, Cora. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our Early Career Researchers Wednesday webinar on public involvement in research. My name is Vinod Irangovan. I'm a postdoc at Max Planck Institute for Biophysical Chemistry in Germany. And I'm a member of eLife Early Career Advisory Group, and I'll also be moderating today's webinar. Just a word about our host today, eLife. It's a mission-driven nonprofit organization and an open access journal that is working to improve all aspects of research communication in support of excellence in science. The role of Early Career Advisory Group, or ECAG, as you see in the picture, is to influence and support eLife's work to catalyze broad reforms in the evaluation and communication of science, in particular, to represent the needs and aspirations of researchers at very early stages in their research careers for a culture that is healthy for science and for scientists. This webinar series, ECR Wednesday webinars, is just one such initiative that eLife has launched to support early career community. Now I'd like to welcome four speakers we have with us today. Emma Doris from University College Dublin in Ireland, Gail Davis and Rich Gorman from Animal Research Nexus, University of Exeter, and Diego Gomez, who is a public engagement coordinator at University of Cambridge. We are missing a patient advocate's voice, Stacey Grialis, who is a patient advocate from Irish Platform for Patient Science and Industry, is supposed to join us today, but unfortunately, she's not with us today. Before going into the topic, I'd also tell you that please follow us on Twitter at eLife Community account using the hashtag ECR Wednesday. To give an introduction about public involvement, or the topic that we will discuss for the next 1 hour with the panelists, it's about involving patients and public. It is a very strategic process of research design that is important for basic research. Public involvement is even called as one of the cornerstones of responsible research and innovation. With all of these importance about public involvement, now any researcher would have questions that is ranging from if it is meaningful to involve public at all in their research design, or is it indeed appropriate to do such engagement with public? This is what we'll actually be discussing today. First up today is Emma Doris. So Emma is a molecular biologist by training, and she leads a patient and public involvement initiative called the Patient Voice in Arthritis Research. And Emma is also an eLife ambassador for good practices in science, where she's also leading an initiative about public involvement. Now I'll let Emma speak about her initiative and her experiences on public involvement.
Thank you. I'm just going to show you my slides there. So yeah, by training, I'm a molecular biologist, and up until about 3 years ago, we didn't do any patient or public involvement in our lab at all. And within the last 3 years, through a very supportive environment, we've built it up so that every aspect of our research and the administration and governance has patient or public involvement throughout. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about really laying kind of some of the groundwork behind why I do public involvement, and to address really some of the questions that I'm most frequently asked from people who do not, like me, are not public facing in their research, about how we can actually meaningfully involve the public so that it's a benefit to us as researchers and to our research. So that's what I'm going to do today. So first question really that I tend to get asked is, should we involve the public in our research? So the question I always ask to people is your research funded by the public? So this could be by a charity, it could be by a national organization, it could be by EU funding, so Marie Curie or Horizon 2020. If the answer to any of that is yes, then you actually have a duty to be accountable and transparent with how you spend public money. And if you are not, at a very basic level, able to be transparent in the communications around your research and what you're actually doing with the money that you're given, then you have to question the integrity around that, around the actual grant, whether you're meeting the terms and conditions of your grant. So at a very basic level, public involvement can really help with the communications aspect. It has much, much broader depth than that. But at the base level, if you're funded by the public in any field, you really should have some degree of public involvement. An important point is that public involvement is often conflated with public engagement and public outreach, and we're not really quite sure what it means. So it's important to note it's not a way for you to be benevolent to the public or to patients. And I don't mean this in a patronizing way. A lot of the time we mix it up with a little bit of media spin. It's not the same thing. You as a researcher, you should be thinking about the benefit that it has to you as a researcher and to your research. So what I mean by that is, if you are doing public involvement correctly, what you're actually doing is improving the best practice of your research, and it will help you and help your research by increasing the relevance and the impact of your research. So a little bit around my background. This is where I work. It's a Biomedical and Biomolecular Institute here in Dublin, UCD, and I do all of these terribly scientific things in the aim of trying to investigate the biology behind arthritis. But it's important to note, this is not my research. This is my methodology. And there's a very distinct difference between those two aspects. And sometimes when we're thinking, how do I involve the public in my research? Our minds go to the methodology as our research. It's not. Our research is much wider than that. So, for example, if we take this slide here as showing a researcher journey, right? So right from when you're starting to come up with the idea for your next grant proposal, right to the close. I'm told there's supposed to be a close on project grants, although they seem to go on forever for me. But if we look at this part here that I've highlighted, the scientific research and activities, that's where the methodology fits in. The rest of it is also part of your research, and we just don't tend to think about it as much. And at every one of those aspects, that's where we can have public involvement. So this can be around the idea generation. So don't forget that if you are relying on the academic literature or what's already published, you're not coming up with novel ideas. This can help to feed into novel ideas, but if you actually go out into the community and into the society and talk to people, you can really pad it out and get much, much more context to really develop novel aspects of those ideas and how they work within your own community. In around the proposal, identifying the relevant aspects of your research and how to actually get that key message across is really, really important. And that's somewhere, again, where the public can really, really help in training you to make your communication much better, but also help in identifying what is important, not just from the scientific point of view, but for the community. Again, if you're lucky enough to win the grant, looking at the best ethics is really important. That's something where the public can help. We also now have a public member on all of our interview panels for researchers hired on grants that have public funding. And I got to tell you, if you want to know if a researcher is interested in just any job or interested in the job you're advertising, it's a fantastic way to have it, because getting that difference between good science and how it actually fits into the wider context, there's no better way than actually having someone that has real things at stake ask those questions. Okay, we also have public involvement around the governance. A lot of the times we get applied biology grants, so Therefore, they're supposed to have a translational aspect, an application at the end. And sometimes we fall into a scientific hole because, you know, I love self-signaling. That tends to be where I go down rabbit holes. And when you have somebody on the governance panel just simply asking you what the benefit is that and what objective within your grant it fits into, it makes you think about that. And it makes you be a little bit more strategic in actually reaching and hitting the deliverables that you said you would hit. So all throughout, and you can see that there's scope for public involvement. The outcomes and the impacts is it's another important part. So not just in the language you use around communications, but in actually getting from that knowledge production, which is a lot of what we do in kind of lab-based science, to actually getting that across the line into knowledge use. So that impactful aspect and that translational aspect, that's where public involvement can really, really help, whether it's in commercialization or getting it into societal use or into community-based use. So there are lots of aspects outside of the lab that public involvement can help, and that is all part of your research. So it's important just to remember, public involvement, it's not about unleashing the public into your lab, your biological assays that will be safe. It's about the other parts of research. So really important thing, research relevance. That is what we want. We want to stop research waste and increase our research relevance. And that is an aspect where public involvement can really, really help, because it means that you are making decisions around your research based on the most complete knowledge possible, because you're accounting not just from the academic and the scholarly side of things, but actually how it's used in real life. Okay. So public involvement can help with cooperation and involvement for project goals, the relevancy of your project questions, which is so important, the better understanding of your project context, communication to stakeholders, and stakeholders is your funding body, the people that you're you know, if it's in healthcare, your patients, but also your university, industry, commercialization, that's all part of the stakeholders, and it can really improve that. Improved research impact and reduction in research waste. So I know that time is quite tight, so I'm going to leave you with a final thought, and that is that public fund research in the hope it will improve the public good. So you really need to ask yourself, if fundamentally, can you improve the public good if you don't actually account for the public experience? And that is really the main reason why I involve the public in research. And it's not easy, but it is possible. And the community of people that do involve public in laboratory-based research and in life science type of research are very open and willing to sharing their experiences. So you're not alone if you are looking to actually implement it. Okay, that's me. I'll hand you back.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks for reminding the responsibility of publicly funded researcher. That was a good start. Now I'd like to invite Professor Gail Davis and Dr. Rich Gorman from the Animal Research Nexus, University of Exeter. Gail and Rich both are situated in the Geography Department at University of Exeter. Gail's research looks at the changing geographies of knowledge, including public engagement methods, international scientific collaborations, and translational research. Rich is interested in how health intersects with people's ethical and emotional relationships with animals and opens up complex policy interfaces relating human and animal care. So Rich and Gail, please.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity to share some of our work around patient and public involvement. We hope you can see the slides here in front of you, and we look forward to comments and questions towards the end. What we want to do is we want to start with a little bit of context. We're both social scientists and we're funded by a 5-year Wellcome Collaborative Award. This is seeking to deliver new thinking and increase understanding of the social relations around animal research and also support communication across them. At the University of Exeter here, we're tracing the ways in which people affected by health conditions are encountering animal research in practices of patient involvement and public engagement. So we're, to some extent, bringing the patient experience into this conversation. We're interested in how patient knowledges might shape research in contexts where the biosciences are increasingly asked to be transparent, translational, and also publicly accountable. So we're studying involvement with animal research, particularly because it's often a contentious public issue, but also because it shares challenges with other forms of involvement in preclinical research. The idea, I think, is that if we get it right here, then we can get it right anywhere. In terms of terminology, we tend to use PPI as an accepted acronym, but as in other fields, there's a blurred boundary for us between patients and publics. We also recognise that involvement of people and engagement with people are two sides of the same coin. In the area we're working in, building capacity for patient involvement often emerges from good public engagement. So while Emma differentiated between the two, we've often looked at how they're linked. In our research, what we're doing is we're taking part in a wide range of PPI activities and talking to those people who are involved in them, whether they're organisers, researchers, or patients and publics. So these might give you an idea of some of the activities that are going on out there. There are patient and public tours of laboratory animal facilities. There's patient and public involvement via the lay review panels on medical charities and so on, which develop priorities in partnership with people affected by the research. There's patient advocacy groups, for example, those organised around animal models. And then we're looking at a range of patient and researcher experiences represented in film and social media. And we've done around 50 interviews, and we've run a couple of workshops which look to bring people together to work out ways of addressing the issues that emerged in our research. And a key challenge for us has been that there are different groups of people who've got different ideas about what PPI around animal research is actually trying to achieve. Just for this short talk, we can summarise at least 3 distinct aims around growing involvement. These include demonstrating impact, so where PPI is expected to deliver meaningful and measurable outcomes for supporting organisations, whether they're charities or research organisations, institutions. It includes reshaping research, where PPI is expected to challenge and reshape specific research practices and directions and priorities. It can also include supporting science, where PPI is expected to provide support for animal research in a pro-anti-public debate. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the multiple aims can actually be demanding for the patients and the publics who are involved. It's additionally quite complex, we found, as they don't necessarily align. For example, supporting research to the public and challenging research priorities may even contradict on occasions. So we've been trying to understand these drivers, the challenges and the opportunities across the different aims for PPI around animal research. And we're particularly interested, as I said, as introducing some of these missing voices around patient expectations and experiences. So Rich is going to show you some of the things that people are saying.
Cool. So firstly, many organisations are still really quite uncertain about the value and process of involving people with preclinical animal research, particularly about what will be useful and meaningful involvement around animal research. So as the quote on the screen, I hope you can all see, explains, I think it's a little less clear when it comes to animal research what role the PPI group members can play, the value of the contribution they can make, and what that contribution would look like. There are also uncertainties about what to do with the information that comes back from lay reviews. Another interviewee explained to us that it can be really hard to interpret the results of patient reviews, particularly because they don't know whether they're reviewing the research high or low, simply because it's animal research. For many scientists too, these can be quite difficult conversations. Some scientists may have questions that they want to take to patients, including how to select or improve animal models so that they represent the most meaningful aspect of patients' health concerns. But they're finding the conversations that patients and publics are expecting to have about animal research around ethics and personal acceptability. Some scientists have identified a shift in their colleagues being much more open in telling people what they're doing and why they're doing it in terms of animal research, but they're not, to quote, convinced at the moment that they've made that shift to being prepared to make any changes to their experiments based upon their conversations with people affected. So what do patients say? Well, we found that people are really happy to talk to us about this topic. They do have their views, but of course, these aren't always the same views. So we can't necessarily offer any easy solutions. Some people affected by different health conditions want to use what they have learned about animal research to publicly endorse animal research to others through talking about animal welfare and ethics. One of our interviews explained how they had to, quote, been able to disseminate some of their knowledge when it comes to the use of animal testing. I've been able to explain to them and talk about the control systems that are in place and the ethical procedures. This isn't universal. On other occasions, people have said that they don't want to stop animal research, but they also don't want to know about it or be involved in it. Equally though, for some people, the lack of a safe space to talk about potentially difficult issues like animal research can generate anxiety. Some patients would prefer to be involved and to know the details about animal research to counter their anxieties of not knowing. As the quote on the screen explains, I think it would be good that we had more of these conversations. Reducing that anxiety would be a huge help. So as a very sort of brief conclusion to this brief presentation, everyone finds it difficult having conversations about animal research, but there are potentially greater difficulties from not having these conversations. Patient and public involvement in animal research is complex for patients who both have different concerns and are positioned by different interests as speaking for themselves, for research, and sometimes for animals, and they struggle to resolve this in private. PPI in animal research is challenging for scientists who are maybe not used to talking about animal research or having their basic research choices challenged. And PPI in animal research is complex for organisations and funders because impacts may be less tangible. It's not possible to come up with a single solution, but what we can say is that creative, comfortable and small-scale experiments are important for informing, engaging and involving patients in practices around animal research. We published our interim report in January this year, and it has a series of practical recommendations for next steps and more information about this topic. And if you've enjoyed learning a little bit about our work in this short presentation, please do check it out. Thank you. So I think we'll hand back over now.
Thank you, Rich and Gail. That was interesting perspective to look into how one can meaningfully engage different stakeholders. Thanks for bringing that over to this table. Now I'd like to invite the next speaker, but before that, if you have questions, please type in the webinar functions panel, or you can also tweet us via eLife community using ECR Wednesday hashtag. Now I'd like to introduce Diego. So Diego Gomez is a public engagement officer or public engagement coordinator for the School of Biological and Biological Sciences at the University of Cambridge. And he's responsible for developing strategies and practices for a culture of excellence in public engagement. And his research focuses on the partnerships between science education at primary level and public engagement initiatives offered by universities. So he's going to talk about strategies that we can use for public involvement. Diego.
Hello, thank you for having me in this webinar. I hope you can see my slides. It has been really interesting to hear both of your presentations because I come a bit of at a different perspective here because I come as a school level perspective. So as Vinod said, I'm the public engagement coordinator both for the clinical school and the School of Biological Sciences here at Cambridge. And my work is a bit different because my main work has been in terms of developing a strategy for public engagement with research, of establishing networks of public engagement with research within the university, and also of providing training in relation to public engagement with research. I found it really, really interesting what Gil mentioned in terms of establishing the bridge and establishing the connections between public engagement with research and public and patient involvement, because that's one of the key tasks that we have, because as I'm best at school level, so I work with researchers that range from, in terms of their initiatives, very established PPI projects to other researchers that are developing more, for instance, outreach in secondary schools, and we have them in the same networks, and we offer training for both of these professionals. So it's quite interesting to establish these links and see what are the differences, but also what are the shared learnings that one can have. So starting a bit what I'll be talking about, I'm talking about a bit of a different level in terms of how a public engagement strategy worked for us here in terms of in the school, in terms of establishing a culture of public engagement. Then I'll focus a bit on our network and how our network supports researchers and public engagement professionals in the different departments, units, and institutes, and also in terms of how public engagement training is facilitated in the university and helping our researchers. So in terms of our public engagement research strategy, in which PPI is also a core part of it, is why was it useful and why did we developed it and get it approved by both schools councils. So for us, it was very important because it was a way of getting public engagement with research recognized in our university, also to get the buy-in from senior academics. That was very important for us to then for them to be able to scale down in their different departments and units. And also having that strategy recognized and approved has given us a tool in which it's been easier for us to get the researchers involved, and also for them to then establish the training in terms of public engagement research within the university. Also allow us to try and define a little bit in terms of how we aim for public engagement with research to look like in university, and also how to evaluate it, which is a key point for us. Also, just in a side note, it was also very important because through the strategy, the development of the strategy and its implementation, we were able to establish public engagement steering committees in different departments and units, in which we have postdocs involved and in some cases PhD students involved. So they actually have a voice in terms of their departments and of their units, a development of public engagement and public engagement initiatives. So the strategy was very important for us, but as someone would say that it's not always necessary to have a strategy if you're not at that point. A strategy is a tool, but it's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. Now, networks. Why have networks been extremely important? Here in Cambridge, establishing the network was one of the most challenging, but also one of the most rewarding initiatives that we have, because public engagement happens in all of the different departments, all the different institutes. There's a wide range of professionals, public engagement professionals, researchers developing public engagement, and it's about trying to capture and trying to bring all of these people together, because a lot of the times they would be working in their departments and they're developing their projects, but we felt that there was a need for us to learn from each other and to be able to share with each other. So one of the things that we've started this year is actually our public engagement with research community is not only in our network, is not only for the School of Biological Science and Clinical Medicine, but we also involve the museums professionals. We also involve the College of Arts and Humanities professionals and researchers in this network, so we can learn with each other, and it has been a way of promoting collaborations between, for instance, a researcher in clinical medicine and a museum and officer. So it promotes this interdisciplinarity that we are very keen on having. For interest as well, it's as well as we hold this university-wide public engagement meetings, we also have smaller focus, for instance, biological sciences or clinical medicine catch-ups, in which you can offer more tailored advice and one-to-one support. But we feel that the network in which we have all of the different professionals of public engagement in the same room together, talking and sharing, has been very useful for our researchers as well. terms of the training and support, that's been it's one of my babies, so to speak, that I think has been very, very, very crucial in terms of developing the public engagement research in our university, because the skills developed within this training range from we have training in using comedy for research, then we have specific PPI training for researchers in the clinical school. So it covers all the different aspects in relation to public engagement with research. And we have both external professionals coming in, and we use our in-house learning and our in-house specialists for that as well. And it has been extremely important. Apart from the training, the training is also a good way to get involved, because the training is open for PhD students, postdocs, and also for public engagement professionals. So it's apart from the training itself, it becomes a mini network as well, in which we have some very early career researchers that starts to establish these networks as well with professionals and with more senior academics. So it has been a very fruitful learning exercise, but also networking for our researchers. And it's something that we again offer across schools, although I lead on the training, but we offer the training to all of the different schools, and it has been extremely important in that sense, because again establishes this interdisciplinarity for us is very important. Now, from a scope in terms of why is public engagement with research important for our researchers and early career academics, also to recognize in their future careers, that's another way that I convinced them that this is extremely important, is in terms of the skills they developed, that and this slide is not to read, but to have an overview of the different skills that developing projects as an early academic, an early career researcher, and developing projects in public engagement, how helpful it can be in their future career, even if their future career is outside academia. It offers them different skills, project management skills, communication skills, and these skills will be useful for them throughout their life. And I finish on this slide because it's important to recognize that public engagement research can prepare early career academics for their career, whatever it is, because even when we are an early career researcher, we need to be aware that there will be different routes in what our future career will be, and the skills that you gain and the knowledge and the cross-cutting, cross-sectional skills that you gain can be useful throughout your career, even if that career is outside of academia. And for a lot of us, it will be outside of academia. So it's important to recognize those skills that are developed. And I finish on this slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diego. That was interesting to learn about the training and support available for early career researchers in particular, and also to have a cross-sectional skill set that one can learn through public engagement. With that, we finished the first part of our webinar, and I'd like to thank all the speakers once again for sharing their perspectives on public involvement. Now we come to the most interesting part, where we open up the floor for questions. We're getting questions from people joining the webinar. So there's a question, is there interest among the panel in working with a company that can help engage and educate the public and patients about the importance of research and their environment? Do any panel member have answer for this?
Yeah, I think part of that goes back again to some of the difference between public engagement and public involvement, because a large part of public involvement is about engaging with the society so that we as scientists or as researchers can learn from them, as opposed to communicating. Now, there's a two-way street. Obviously, you need to be able to address, to make the information needs of your audience, you need to be able to address that. But that's again one of the big confusions that we often get, is that it's all about showing the public how great we are, whereas a lot of the time it's flipped on our heads. What we actually are trying to do is make our research better by having the public help us, as opposed to the other way around.
So we can follow that up, and just to add that, you know, one of the reasons why we've said in the area we're working that engagement and involvement cross over is because there's an assumption when many publics and patients meet a researcher who's working on animals that there's going to be a conversation about ethics, and the conversation kind of ends there. And we're trying to say, well, actually, no, you can talk about research priorities, you can talk about research practices, there's a conversation to be had at what point does something that's in preclinical development go through into clinical development, what would even the kind of dosing protocol that's being used with the preclinical research, what would that look like to translate to a clinical trial more easily? So in that context, you're really going and looking to the publics, to patients, for some intelligence on how to enable the knowledge to move. What I would say though, in terms of working with a company or something like that, so oftentimes these are quite specific skills, and it's really interesting to hear the kind of culture change and the training that's going on at Dublin and at Cambridge and this sort of thing. I wouldn't say that external companies can never be involved in these kind of activities, but I think what it really requires is a culture shift within an organization so that you connect up the research with the engagement and the involvement. So they're part and parcel of the whole thing of shifting a research culture to being more engaged.
Yeah, and really building up relationships is a huge part of successful involvement, because you need to have enough of a relationship that people are comfortable to disagree with you. And if you are kind of outsourcing that, it's very difficult. And when you're working on things that are very specialist, if you're outsourcing it, again, they don't have the knowledge for the follow-up questions on that. So you need to really have, you know, a good relationship where you can disagree and you can really see all aspects of a topic and really work through them. You need to have enough of a relationship. Yeah, I always think if somebody is telling me everything I'm doing is right, then I'm doing something wrong. Yeah.
Just to add, I think much more than working with companies, at least from the research that I see, what has been most useful in the most successful PPI initiatives I've seen is working with charities, for instance, that are very involved with patient groups and that have that knowledge and that we can learn from each other. I would say that that's much more useful, and that you can, both parties can gain much more working together than with companies. With companies, I would say that it's for more particular things that will be more, and this is when the words are important to be defined. This is more if you're talking about communications activities, that's when you would use companies. I wouldn't say for this part, I wouldn't see it as fruitful. But again, happy for someone to disagree with me.
Thank you for that. Since we actually spoke about whether to involve a company or not, there's a specific question for Diego. The question is, how often researchers come to you for advice because they want to set up a new public engagement initiative?
They come often, especially when it's time. So, for instance, there was a deadline for the research enrichment public engagement from the Welcome, and in that week, I got a lot of researchers coming. So it comes on waves. So if there's a deadline coming up, I have a lot. And as my role, so I've started in January this year, as my role and people start to know that I'm here to offer that support, it's becoming more common. I actually came from a meeting that I was supporting a researcher, and to be honest, is one of the most fruitful parts, one of the most enjoyable parts of my job. I go with my big logic model, which is how we plan the public engagement initiatives, and we work together. And yeah, so it's becoming quite common, and it's very enjoyable.
And also, on the other way around, do you tend to have to convince researchers to involve or engage in the public?
To come in, for me to go in and chase them, let's put it that way. So it has happened, especially when I know that there are specific grants we can go for if they have a certain funding body. I've asked for our research strategy office to let me know who do we have in departments that have that funding that I know we'll be able to apply for public engagement grants. So then I wouldn't say chase them, I will very nicely send them an email if they're interested in applying for that.
And there's another specific question for Emma. So what were the most useful resources you found when you were learning about effective public involvement?
Yeah, so a lot of the resources that were available were around the health and social care, which didn't necessarily translate a lot into me in the lab. I actually found quite a lot in design. So in product design, user-based centered design is where I actually found an awful lot of the resources. It's part of the reason that I'm working in the space with the eLife and the public involvement is that we're trying to collate a lot of those resources together, in particularly with regards to case studies and shared learning, so that we can see what worked and what didn't work for people. Is because a lot of that wasn't there, because even the people that do it, they have a lot on their plate and often don't have time to write about it or to share it. So trying to get those together is important. But there are areas out there in certain areas of marketing and certain areas of product design that I found, but otherwise we've put what we have found to be useful in citizen science and to be useful and applicable to basic science and life sciences together on the ECR Central website, which is run by another of the eLife initiatives, and there is a public involvement resource section there where we upload every couple of months anything that we found useful.
Thank you for highlighting the resource from ECR Central. Yeah, and there's a question to Gail.
Okay, I was going to add something to that, but happy to take a different question.
Yeah, if you want to add to that, yes, please. But there's also a specific question for you. I'm just scrolling through. But yeah.
Thank you. I was just, thank you, Emma. That's great to know those resources are there. What I wanted to just say is that in the world that we're looking at, there's also a desire from the people who are involved for some training as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we take into account the patient and the public perspectives. So they are also looking for those tips on how do I do this, how do I tackle this. In the particular material we're looking at, they want to know something that scientists may really take for granted, like what is a model? So that when they have a research grant in front of them, they know what that language means to the person who's written the grant. So yeah, if you're thinking about writing resources or adding to these resources, do think about this from the other perspective as well.
Yeah, and on that note, just something that we tend to do is we always budget for training for our public involvement members, but we never state what that training is because we don't want to train them like us. But when they come to us with something that they feel needs to be enhanced from their perspective, then we'll accommodate their training for it. And I think that's very important, not to just make public versions of you with your own thoughts, but to have some sort of budget or facility there that you can accommodate and help them in their roles as well, if and as they decide they need it.
Right, excellent. So the specific question that was for Gail, what was the main interest among patients you interviewed, and which element or part of research they cared the most about?
That's a great question. I've done a lot of talking. I'm wondering if Rich wants to answer this because he did a lot of the interviews with patients and publics.
So as sort of Emma was talking about earlier, for a lot of patients, the interest is the translatability, particularly when they are getting involved in this kind of preclinical basic research. They want to know, well, how is this going to help people? And that is the question that they want to ask of research, especially if they're being involved in helping decide what research gets funded, or if they're being given an opportunity to sort of feedback. Another big priority that comes to mind was lay summaries. As scientists, we will write in our own very highly specialized vocabularies and disciplinary language, and a lot of patients just found it really impenetrable and wanted to see that language opened up more so that they could understand. But also they wanted to lend their expertise to help scientists do that. So yes, to so many patients who had helped scientists rewrite and explain their lay summaries to other people, and spoke to scientists as well who found that they got the funding because they'd had a much stronger lay summary, because they'd co-written it together with patients. In terms of the animal research specifically, I think what patients really want to know is they want to learn about the culture of care that is expressed in laboratory animal research. They want to know that if they are being reliant on or are sort of being involved in making decisions about research that involves the use of animals, they want to know that the level of care that is expressed with these animals is at the highest standards. Because often people can empathise with them if it is a model of something. They have that kind of almost relationship and empathy. I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I think the only thing I would say is one of the things that comes across from doing interviews with people who've been involved is that there's almost they enjoy having that relationship. So they enjoy the way that research gets humanized. They enjoy going into spaces where perhaps not everybody gets to go into. So there's a sense of being quite privileged to come into the world of scientists. And you know, maybe for early career researchers who are slightly daunted about what the encounter or what engaging the public might be, that oftentimes it's felt to be a privilege to be involved. But because it's a privilege to be involved, that can switch. So if you're not then listened to, or if you're patronized in that context, that can be very quickly counterproductive. So I think a lot of this works or doesn't work on the quality and authenticity of the relationship that you're building up with the people that you're working with.
And I think just another note on that is that when you are working on something, a lot of the times patients or the public are only aware of the big headline findings. So they may not realize that there is research going on into their disease or something that is affecting them or their family members. And to know that there are other people working behind the scenes, actually working to try and help them, even if it's in the very basic, the very early phase, can be really, really helpful for them. That's the feedback some of the feedback that we have gotten. They didn't actually realize that this was going on at all, let alone that it was going on in Ireland. So it actually really, really does help with the isolation that an illness brings.
Yeah,
it's a great point to mention.
Can I just ask myself a question? Sorry, because I'm interested in this to all of you. It's something that came up recently, and I'd be very curious because it was a discussion I had, which is the authenticity that you mentioned. It's so important, but also the long-term establishment of this relationship with communities and with patient groups. Have you seen issues in terms of when, because I'm not sure how your landscape is, but a lot of the times for here that I see is that you have a research grant for a few years and then you have a PPI coordinator or a PPI specialist that's there for the time of that research. And when that funding finishes, they move on and those relationships are lost, and that has become highlighted as an issue with the patients, because then that relationship is lost. Sorry, I just would ask if that's an issue, recognizing how can we overcome it, if we can overcome it. It's just a question that I have. Sorry. to both of you.
Okay, well, yes, it's something that definitely comes up, because especially when researchers are so transient, and they can have very, very good relationships with one researcher, and whoever takes their place may not be as good. There's a couple of things that we do. First of all, we have embedded patient involvement into the governance structure. So this year we completely reorganized our centre, our research centre, so that 1/3 of the voting board is patient representatives or carers, with a defined role. And part of that is in the maintenance of this, ensuring that if something is going wrong. There's also a terms of reference for every patient involvement that we have that has an external person that can be not involved in the centre that can be contacted if there are any issues arising, so that things can be addressed before they become major issues. And we also I've also developed a training workshop for some of the patients that are interested around academic research. It's not just if they're on a project, it could be that they put an awful lot of work into a funding application that is rejected, that they have become very excited about, that the people then move on, that they are still left with. So around some of the realities, which is very foreign to people who are not in the academic space. So to understand that they know what's going into, but we always use the terms of reference around what's expected from us, what's expected from them, and they're not the only ones that sign it. We all sign it, so that there is something in place so people know where they stand. They know that they might be coming on board to meet once every 3 months as opposed to coming on board to being involved weekly in something. It's just making sure that people understand why they're there, what their involvement's going to be, and the expectations. And I think if you set expectations that, you know, and then try and measure how well you're meeting them, that alleviates some of it. Yeah. But the transient nature and the system of academia is always going to be an issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, that actually, there's a question to Diego. So what would be the most effective way to help transfer the learning between departments that are more and less experienced with public and patient involvement?
The main way that we do it is through the network. Our network meetings are the main way in which we try. So one way that we are developing it, and it's going to continue for next year, is when we recognize, and this is not only me, there public engagement coordinators in different schools as well, in other schools, is when we recognize that there is someone that has a particular knowledge of one project, of one successful project, of one method that they used. We ask them to come and present to the network, to the whole network, and then after that we have a discussion and we can share. And to be fair, that engagement network meeting is just a start. From there on, when people find common interests and then they see they can learn from another researcher or another coordinator, they then go on and develop it together. So the network for us is definitely the way in which that knowledge is shared. And then what is happening now is that also when researchers want to collaborate with someone and they want to learn it from someone, they come through us as a way of, do you have any contact within here and doing that? So we also work as a bridge, so to speak, in between the different departments, but definitely the network meetings, because they are also sometimes the opportunity for us to learn as well what's happening.
And there's another question for Emma, actually 2 questions that are kind of related, so I'll just read out them. So what motivated you to start the patient involvement in your project? And how did you start introducing PPI to your lab? And what else is happening that involves patients? Can you give specific examples?
Okay. So it's always made sense to me. It just seems logical. If I'm working in an area, I want to know as much as I can about the area, and why would I rely on secondary data when I can just go and talk to people? Basically, it always made sense from the first time that I had to write an ethics proposal and I was told to put in the collection times for blood draw, and I went, well, does this suit the people? And they went, this is just always what we do. It just never made sense to me during my PhD. So when I was given the opportunity to do it, I kind of took the ball and ran with it. There's been a sea change in Ireland. So our national funding body has started asking a single question on applications, which is, can you explain your public involvement in this project? They didn't grade it, they just asked it. So it kind of put it in people's minds. And I was lucky that when I moved a research group to the research group I'm in now, that the director had come from the UK, where he had sat on grant bodies where there were patient involvement, and he had seen, you know, the real contribution that they had. So not only did I think it made sense, I was in a situation that was supportive for it, and generally the landscape with the EU under the RRI, Responsible Research and Innovation, which has public involvement as part of it, in combination with our national body pushing it. It just meant that the landscape was right for that time. So that was the first part. Ooh, sustainable life, sorry, it's her. There we go. The other part around some of the concrete examples. So we, for example, I work in a lot of rare disease areas. So we do some testing where we have families that have shared, seems to have a family pattern of inheritance. So we would have patient involvement on that to help us write the consent, but we also have patient involvement on that because it's really, really important that when we do our communications around our project, which can be quite complex and quite genetic based, and there's lots of computational biology in there. If we want to actually explain what we're doing, that can be quite difficult from our point of view, because we understand what we're writing, but it turns out the rest of people outside the doors don't necessarily understand what we're writing. So we need that, but it's also we do a lot of interdisciplinary research. So even within our field of science, there's a different language used compared to somebody who's in a related but not the same discipline. So doing the plain English, writing, understanding how to convey things in plain English, which we use a lot of mentors in plain English, which is our public partners, to help us and come in and train us in. That really, really helps to increase our interdisciplinary research as well. We would have it to provide, so we have it at the governance level, we have it in the interview panels, we have patient mentors on our projects. We would have it in funding applications, especially if we're looking to translate something into either policy or commercialization. That's a natural bridge there, because there are lots of people might be a patient, but they may also be an expert in another field. These are people who just, one aspect of their life may be that they would have some sort of an inflammatory illness. The other aspect is that they have lots of other really useful, helpful talents. And by working together, we can really progress things. We would do it for the relevance. So if we're considering, one of them was, we were working with some of the medical devices, and we were considering trying to reformulate an old drug. And we kind of for sure, like, is this relevant? Because there are newer drugs that people can take that do work for the right people. So for us, from a scientific point of view, it made sense for us to do it, but we wanted to make sure that even if we did do this drug has quite a bad reputation. So would a new version of it still maintain that reputation? And would it be worth us actually doing the science if downstream there was going to be such a negative feeling towards it because of the historic context of it? So even at that early phase, that was really, really useful for us to be able to understand, and even not just understand it, but then convey that when we were applying. So there's lots of different aspects, lots of them. So there's on our website, we have quite a long list of various different things. So
time is running out, but I'm wondering if I can ask Emma a question, if possible. So I'm really interested in the multiple kinds of benefits that you've just talked about. Yeah. And I wondered how you evaluate this, because we've discovered there seems to be a pressure to evaluate the involvement on a kind of project by project basis. So how did it affect this project? But what you're talking about, a lot of it is about a research environment or a culture change, much broader.
So we evaluate the methods that we used and as to whether the methods that we implemented, and we evaluate that we actually developed something a tool in order to allow us to evaluate the methods. But I think a lot of and this is the next phase that I'm working in within eLife, is looking at the policy, because at the moment what we need are the papers that are being published to say whether or not they had public involvement in it, so that we can build up the evidence base in which to analyze it. The evidence base isn't there because we haven't been asking those questions. The BMJ asks, yeah. But others don't. So that's part of what we're doing at the moment, is we're actually looking at doing some scoping in the policies around the institutions and the journals to see if we can just get journals to start asking that question so that we can build that evidence.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. So since we're running out of time, there are a lot of questions coming in from Twitter, but I'd like to ask a final closing comment on this particular one, where researchers are usually reluctant to talk about or have difficult conversations. So there be any advice from the panel on how researchers can train themselves to get over this fear, particularly to maximize the value of public involvement in basic or fundamental research?
Well, public involvement, first of all, doesn't need to be something very big. It can be something quite small. So it can be meeting a group of people over a coffee. So you don't necessarily need to open yourself up to all of the public, but you need to open it up to a relevant sphere for you. So that can really, really help. And then Diogo is probably, because building up those skills that you need is an important part.
So I was about to start with exactly what you said. Start small. Don't build up the way and see how comfortable you feel. And exactly what you mentioned, you don't need to start big in what sense, but start. That's the idea, and look at all of the training opportunities, because now, thankfully, early career researchers have a lot of PPD opportunities to develop. And I would say training is extremely important. Get yourself trained with people that know the field that you can learn from. So if there's a lot of PPI specialists in and around that you can learn from them, get trained on them, and then don't be afraid. And whatever it is that, if it doesn't suit you one type, there's a lot of ways in which you can engage with the public. So also play to your strengths, learn, develop your different skills, also play to your strengths and know yourself. So, but take advantage of all of the training opportunities that you now have. Will it be through your university? Will it be through their amazing website that you can learn from, involve? You'll know, in terms of PPI, you will know far better than I do, but there's a lot of good. If we're talking about more general public engagement with research, starting with their skills, go into the NCCP website that has so many brilliant tools. So learn.
Do you want to add on that, Gail and Rich?
No, there's not a huge amount to add. I mean, I think what's just been said recapitulates some of what we found is really what people are looking for is comfortable conversations. So, you know, start where you can have those, and start with people who've got some experience perhaps, and you know, oftentimes things can build from there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of this webinar, but don't let that stop you. So please, if you have more questions, you can use ECR Wednesday hashtag and tweet it via eLife community account. And with that, I would thank all the speakers and everyone who tuned in today and contributed to such nice discussion. It was really a wonderful opportunity to learn about public engagement in its depth. Although not in its complete depth, but an overview of that. With that, I'd like to thank everyone, and I'd also like to inform that the next month's ECR Wednesday webinar will be on science and policy, and I hope to see most of you joining for that webinar too. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.